Good night and welcome to Mindful Live 117. Yes, we're making good pace going along here. 117 already. Who was here for like the first 10? Anyone in the chat was here like in the first 10? Well, I was here for the first 10. Welcome. I'm your host, Nathan Springer. Thank you for being here. It is the 9th of the 8th. It is the 9th of July. Hey, Roni. Welcome. 117. Yes, Mr. Kevin J703. You read that correctly. 117 lives have gone so far. You've entered late into the dance. But worry not. There are more to come. Yes, Rooney. You were here very early. Rooney may have been here in what? The first 1 or 2? Yes, Rooney was here very early. All right, tonight we are talking about a reply the opposition had to one of the statements. Let me phrase this properly. The reply the opposition had to the government's grouse, or the Women's League of the government's political party, to their grouse over a statement made by an opposition senator. Now, last night we went through some of the statement that was made. Oh geez, Catherine 8, it says the right thing. What am I saying? We are in August and I said July. You are right. It is August. The year is progressing so quickly I'm forgetting. Wow. Yes, but we went through this statement a bit yesterday and it's some heavy bacchanal. I think a lot of us in the live would have already heard about that, the kind of heavy bacchanal that went into that statement, allegations about infidelity among high-ranking members, etc. I think it was in poor taste, as such things shouldn't be in the public domain. That's not, to me, I don't think that should be fuel for political discourse. I think that's a poor image for our nation. That's not a positive thing. We spoke about that. But the PNM Women's League had some comments to make, and they called out the opposition leader. They called out the opposition leader, especially her being a woman, and seemingly allowing such speech to go on. So they called her out on that. And she replied. She replied with the same statement she replied with on the invocation of her name and her middle name before, saying, keep her name out of their mouth. The opposition leader insisted that they keep her name out of their mouth. And let's dive into that. Before we dive into that, My Tobago chat wasn't properly stuck, so it retired for the night. It had an early retirement tonight. But the map of the Caribbean you see there, the map of Trinidad you see there, they are sponsored by Study Monkey and Associates. You could check them out over on Facebook. Study is spelled with 2 E's, just by the way. STUDEE Monkey and Associates. The maps and charts are actually very reasonable. Check them out. They have a wide range of stuff. Lots of local content with unique little tidbits that really fit perfectly into the local context. They give you some historical knowledge, the history of the names, where the names came from. Great stuff. So Study Monkey and Associates, the sponsors of these charts. Check them out. Study with 2 E's. Big up Study Monkey. Kamala slams PNM Women's League. Leave my name out your mouths. Leave my name out your mouths. United National Congress leader Kamala Persad-Bissessar has called on the People's National Movement's Women's League to leave my name out your mouth, or leave her name out their mouth, and has also called on local government councillors to boycott today's meeting with government. Now, that's a whole other issue. I found that so inappropriate myself too, but we'll get into that a little later on. She made the comment at the UNC's Monday night forum last night as she knocked a PNM Women's League statement denouncing her silence on UNC Senator Anil Roberts' recent attack on Sharon Clark Rowley, the Prime Minister's wife. Persad-Bissessar said, I have nothing to do with anybody's domestic business. Why are you calling my name and blaming me? Now, I find that to be very disingenuous, because Mrs. Prasad Bisasa very well knows that every time there's something seemingly wrong occurring on the government side, she is one that calls on the Prime Minister to fire someone, to deal with someone, to, make sure that this issue is handled. So if you are the leader of a party and a member of your party is making a statement, that does have something to do with you. That's representative of your party. You are the leader. How can you say what the utterances uttered by members of your party in political gamesmanship has nothing to do with you? I don't understand that. That does not make sense to me. And as Kilborn points out, she's responsible for enforcing party discipline. True. Similarly, if the People's National Movement has some untoward actions going on, the first person you blame, the first finger you point, is at Dr. Rowley. Rightfully so. He is the leader. The leader is the one to take responsibility for actions like that. But she says, I have nothing to do with anybody's domestic business. Why are you calling my name and blaming me? It was the Prime Minister who said, I am not in all your bedroom. It was the Prime Minister who said that. Now, I am trying to recall exactly the instant that was said in recently by our Prime Minister. I cannot recall the exact instant it was said in, but it wasn't to do with a member of his party doing something to someone else. That's not the pertinence here. Did you all meet up last month so I really missed out? No, we did not meet up when the Medium XL. Speaking of that meetup, that is on the 28th. Yes, the 28th of this month, August. Yes, August. Did you know that Mr. Julius Caesar was so big back in the day? 2 months out of the 12 months of the year named after Mr. Julius Augustus Caesar. You could kind of guess which two, July and August. Wow. Like, how big are you? 2 months, one man for the whole world, nearly. Whole world using that calendar. Hi, good night, Stars Juliet. Good night to you too. All right. So leave me out of your bacchanal, Mrs. Prasad Bisasa said. That Women's League has nothing to do. So many people, women, children are missing, but you want to call Kamala name. I might do what the fella, what's his name, Will Smith do. Mrs. Prasad Bisasa is apparently threatening some hard hand, some hard slap. Now, I wouldn't like to see any physical violence in our political landscape, but if in some alternate reality I could have seen a reality TV show where Mrs. Kamala Prasad attempts to slap, you know what? Let's stay away from this. Let's stay away from that. But Mrs. Prasad Bisasa threatened to do like Will Smith do. Just leave my name out of your mouth. Well, if it's like Will Smith did, then it would be her husband who stands up for her and slaps someone for putting her name in their mouth. But I don't think Mr. Bisasa would have any interest in doing that. If Mr. Bisasa would attempt to slap people for calling Kamala Prasad Bisasa's name, he would have a lot of people to be slapping. Like the amount of people you hear calling Kamala, like, they're friends or something like that. She questioned why the league didn't focus on why pepper spray isn't in effect. Good night, Lee, forever board, Tanti Cams. Hassan out of place. What is this? Yes. Mrs. Prasad Bisasa threatened to Will Smith, the PNM Women's League, for keeping her name in their mouth. And she referred to... I ask you, WPC Camille, calling Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, a woman police constable, I suppose here. I ask you, WPC Camille, and so on. leave my name out of your mouth. So I guess our opposition leader is a real bad man out there. Real bad man. Our opposition leader, not on all that small talk. Do not put her name in your mouth. She is out here looking to Will Smith people for calling her name. And that's not what she said. Of course, it was a joke the lady was making. I do not honestly think that the opposition leader was threatening violence to anyone. She was making a joke, obviously. Now, I think, especially being a woman. Now, this isn't my main issue. I harp on women's issues per se, but women's issues are pertinent. And especially being the first woman prime minister in Trinidad and Tobago, I would suppose that such would be of interest to her. And the statement made by the senator could be seen as a form of harassment even. And I would think if you're someone at least attempting to look like you care about women's issues, you would at least make it seem like you're distancing yourself from such a statement. You are not interested in bringing other women's names sexually into disrepute. That's kind of low blow. And the surprising thing is they want to talk about the youth. That's correct. Like people would talk about them for a bit still, but soon they'd just be forgotten till they die. Wow. I could understand, Shai Panda says, I could understand she do not want to be involved, but her response could have been a little better. It could have been a lot better. Now, here's the thing. I do not think, if I were a political strategist, and I'm speaking to Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, I would not tell her to get into the nitty-gritty of that whole incident. Stay away, really, stay away. But distance yourself also. Read the part 2 of my comment. I didn't see the part 2 of your comment. Sorry. Sorry. You know, to have people stop talk about them, they could just retire. All right. Very true, Ria. If they have a problem with people talking about them too much, they can retire. And that's true, and no one will speak about you. But yes, if I was a political strategist advising Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, by all means, don't get too much into that whole business. And if it's a negative image going on your political adversary, well, so be it. But you are a woman. You are a woman that very often champions women's issues. In the same article here, you're talking about pedophile rings and the harassment and pepper spray, and a lot of the pepper spray is about the whole public harassment business. If what the senator said, he said to Mrs. Rowley on a public street, she may have been able to hit him some pepper spray and call that harassment. Those words may have been... We're going to dive into what is harassment further in tonight. So you can listen to what those words are, and they actually fit perfectly into the description of harassment. So you didn't need to get into the nitty-gritty of the issue, but you could have distanced yourself nonetheless and say that you do not promote any negative statements towards women. It's like, I mean, you're a politician. You're a politician. Talking is what you do. But Nathan, how Shai Panda says, but Nathan... her advisors and writers need to go, they're feeling her miserably. I agree. I find Mrs. Prasad Bisesa needs to look at her inner circle and probably fire everyone. Because they're not really pointing her in the right direction, in my opinion. And as it stands really and truly, as I've said before, not a personal attack on Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, but I think for the betterment of the UNC party, and by extension Trinidad and Tobago, she herself should possibly retire. Maybe look to take a more advisory role. But she was speaking here about pepper spray and the implications about public harassment. And pepper spray, for being honest, it's not really about the men. It's a lot about the women and public harassment and being able to defend themselves, etc., etc. And I saw a very interesting article in The Guardian, an opinion piece, that points out, now that power too sweet, that points out some points about an interesting version of a harassment that occurs very regularly in Trinidad and Tobago. Catherine Eat It Over on Instagram says there's also the possibility that she's ignoring her team's efforts at pointing her in the right direction. That's also very, very true, Catherine. That's very true. But if I were in her team and she was ignoring my recommendations like that, well, then I would resign. Blessed Nubian Empress over on Instagram, good evening to you too. Listen to this article. Police, engineers, doctors sharing porn/forced assault videos. But Empress Rooney, if she retires, she has a pension. A very, very lucrative pension. So I'm not sure if the money is the motive. Members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service were identified to be a part of a WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram group chats that share illicit pornography, including videos of women being forcefully assaulted. The word for that, but I'm also on YouTube, and YouTube kind of does their own thing when they're ready. Child images and intimate photos and videos shared without consent. Members of the TTPS, doctors, engineers, and other professionals were also identified to be in the groups along with the TTPS. I was informed of this by a female attorney at law who is also the founder of a civil society group and leader of a team of young women working on the revenge porn issue. This young lawyer and her team infiltrated many of these groups. This lawyer also claimed she screenshotted members of the WhatsApp group and found that members of the TTPS were a part of it. I asked her how she identified them, and she said as follows. Some users had photos of themselves up. 2 were identifiable as police officers based on their uniforms. They held guns in the photos. Now, I believe that to some extent, because nothing goes together like Batch and taking a picture in uniform with that gun. Oh, they love that one. No knock to the police, any police inside of the life, but you got to be honest. If you're not the one to take out the photo in your uniform with the long gun, you know that your batch take out some already. You know that. Like 3/4 of their profile photos. And it turns out that penchant they have for taking out photos in their uniform was one of the ways they were identified in some of those groups. The attorney also sent me screenshots of the TTPS officers in their uniforms, including one officer posing with an unloaded Galil assault rifle, of course with the rifle, of course. I asked this attorney how many people she estimated were in these various groups, and she said as follows. I honestly believe it's thousands of people all together on all the platforms combined. Now, I think this, if you're in and around the internet for a while, you know things like this aren't new occurrences. There have been many groups where they come together and share the material that they have gathered. That's why, now, granted, the action might be illegal and there should be consequences for that. Good, that's established. However, we don't live in a perfect world. We cannot control everyone's actions. And in this case, when you have TTPS officers involved, lawyers, engineers, it may be a bit more difficult to get prosecution in there. So I always urge people, if you're taking a picture, where Tobago gone? Tobago fell. Don't worry, it's there. It just has to be restocked. Day by day, I just want to call it a day. Yeah, but any picture you take of yourself in this modern zeitgeist, any picture you take of yourself and share it to anyone, you should have nearly the assumption that this may end up on the internet. And the internet is kind of forever. It's very difficult to get those things off. The internet is a very large place. There are many hidden corners on the internet where you may be able to get some kind of legal something done in Trinidad and Tobago, but someone is hosting all of your family jewels, all of your precious cookies, all of your hidden surprises. Someone is hosting it in a site out in Lithuania or some kind of ridiculous thing like that. And there's nothing that can be done about it. The thing that can really be done is not take it out. Roni says, correct, it does not come down. Shy Panda, the internet is forever. Not Kim Kardashian is immune. Not even Kim Kardashian is immune to that. Correct. Those things are out there. Many people have tried really hard to scrub the internet of certain images or certain videos, and it's just very difficult. Because bear in mind, someone could download it. And then even if you were to somehow find a hacker group good enough to scour the internet and get rid of it from some servers on the internet, there may be someone with it on their hard drive, and a year later they go to some upload site and upload it. Like, anyway, let's get in further into this. I further queried as to if there were any high-ranking public officials in the group chats. She responded, concerning high-ranking people being on it, I honestly can't say, because they're all anonymous. The only way you might recognize a person on the group is if they put up a profile photo, or if you have their contact and photo numbers and phone numbers saved for Telegram. Now, this presents a real issue right here in and of itself. So, something like this, at a cursory glance, would be a bit difficult to investigate, because if someone has an anonymous profile, even if they do put up a photo, you cannot take the photo on an anonymous profile as evidence of the owner of the profile. You cannot do that. And many of these apps like Telegram, etc., allow for really high levels of privacy. Now, there are global terrorists around the world that use many of these apps to plan terrorist actions. If they could plan that and get away from the FBI, CIA, NSA, well, granted, in some cases, they are the FBI, CIA, and NSA, but that's a whole other story. But if terrorists are able to secretively plan things on some of these apps without being caught, you could understand the level of privacy a lot of these apps have. And just getting the image on the profile is very hard to see this paints somebody as a guilty person, because it's an image. Anyone can upload any image. I could go into this group on an anonymous profile, take some one of your images and put it as my profile picture, and you screenshot someone of the chat's images as being one of the participants in this horrible group. But the image doesn't necessarily prove that. That's a kind of difficult thing to prove. These apps are kind of created with the intent of allowing this kind of level of privacy. That's a problem if you're looking to stop things like this. But on the other side, would you really want everyone in the world able to access everything that you do? Or use my own image and say it wasn't me? Yes, of course, Rooney, that is true. But I am saying that if I use that excuse, it's a believable excuse. How are you going to prove otherwise? I could say, well, that is not me, nah. So them fellas real hate. I have some haters out there, boy. Them haters trying to real get me. So them join that group. Look. Nobody else in the group even have a picture up. How I go put up my picture? Them trying to set me up. And how do you prove otherwise? How do you prove that the picture on a profile is the owner of the profile? This is the young attorney speaking here again. In speaking with several victims, I have compiled a list of men who were in the groups that we identified and verified were trading private and intimate photos and videos of women, along with their full contact information, including where you can find them in real life and their social media account information. They have professionals like police officers, medical doctors, and so on. A lot of engineers are involved. Engineers, your name getting called. Now, it would be interesting to know how she would have accumulated this information. She said she spoke with several victims, so was it that the victims knew who they sent the images to so that they could identify them by that? But because otherwise, she also admitted that almost all of the profiles were anonymous. So how would you identify who is the profile? And even if you know who you sent your image to, how can you prove that was the person who uploaded it? Can you even prove that was the only person you sent the image to? And I'm not trying to make an excuse here for reprobate degenerate men. I am not really trying to do that. But I'm saying in the legal framework, these things get really murky sometimes. If you could prove it, it's much easier. But these groups are made with the intent of privacy. But she did compile a list. However she did it, I don't know. But she compiled a list with names and addresses and full contact information. The attorney sent me screenshots of activities in the group chat with the nudity blocked out so as not to run the risk of further sharing child explicit content. Several screenshots showed a group chat sharing a picture of a teenager taken from her Instagram profile so that other members of the group could cyber stalk the teenager and solicit indecent pictures. So they're planning how to aim and target young ladies from some of these groups. That's some scary stuff. That is some truly scary stuff. So you as a young lady, you post some possibly provocative picture, possibly, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 1,000 new followers. Lots of them trying to solicit pictures from you or get further. And if they are in this group and they are doing this with that intent, very likely if you do send them those pictures, what do you think they're going to do with those pictures? I am so surprised that this is in Trinidad and Tobago. Are you really, Roni? Or is that sarcasm? And that has to be sarcasm because really I am not surprised, not even in the least bit. Not even in the least bit. I don't know how many of you could recall how long ago would that have been. I can't recall exactly how long ago, possibly 6 years or something like that. There was an entire drive on one of these media sharing websites, an entire drive that you could get the name of and get access to that cataloged young ladies and their pictures, their names, which school they went. Someone obviously went through a lot of trouble to do it. That was something known. That was a couple years ago. It's not really that strange in Trinidad, at least not to me. One screenshot of a group chat called Old and New Content, wow, showed members sharing pictures of high school girls in school uniforms, partially undressed. TTPS Cybercrimes Unit yet to act. This female attorney was herself the victim of intimate content being shared without consent. That seems like reason enough to become an activist for such a cause. Some of this content was produced before she turned 18, making it child explicit content if shared. The attorney is also a survivor of assault and had initially made reports to the TTPS in 2021 about all of these issues. In 2022, bear in mind this was at least a year long. Wow, Shiny Douglas. By the way, they already passed a law. If they do catch you sharing that content, you will go to jail. And it will be good for you. In 2021, so yeah, that was since 2021. In 2022, she sought my advice regarding the failure of the TTPS cybercrime unit to act against this WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram group chat that shares child explicit content and videos taken while Trinidadian women were gang abused. Wow. Videos taken while Trinidadian women were gang assaulted? That seems a bit extreme. She reported, I constantly contacted the cybercrimes unit to no avail until one day I was able to talk to somebody, a woman police officer, who said the investigation was in progress. She told me to go back to the police station to talk to a certain inspector for an update on my report. Listen to this. I stopped at the station and met the inspector in person, and he told me that they lost my flash drive because she furnished them with a flash drive with all of the information that she had accumulated so far. When she called, someone told her that the investigation was ongoing. Head over to the station and see the progress. And when she reached to the station, the inspector there told her, well, oops, we lost the flash drive. He also made statements to dissuade me from pursuing further action on the matter. Now, who knows? Possibly maybe the inspector was inside some of those groups too. I don't know. Thankfully, this attorney made a subsequent report to a female officer at the police station, and the female officer retrieved the flash drive that was lost and returned it. I'm almost sure she would have had copies of all the information on the flash drive. Whether the information would have been lost or not isn't really the point. The point is that she supplied them with some information. She's trying to find out at least what they could do with the information, and she's hearing nothing about it. And then, when she went in to see the progress of the information, the inspector informed her that we lost the flash drive. When she contacted a woman police officer, the woman police officer was able to find the flash drive that was lost. What I also find interesting about this is that they returned it. It's not like they kept it to investigate. They returned it. The attorney made a subsequent report to the sexual offences unit at the station, which will be forwarded to the cyber crimes unit. And maybe some investigation will occur there. Now, the guy who wrote this is an attorney, and he spoke of need for new legislation. This shocking situation highlights not only issues with the TTPS, but also the failure of the government to implement proper legislation. To date, there has been no information commissioner appointed under the Data Protection Act. There is a need for the implementation of sexual harassment criminal laws in Trinidad and Tobago for victims of street harassment and online tech sexual abuse. He is saying there needs to be legislation. Here's the thing, I fully disagree. Well, let me not say fully. I mostly disagree. Because if you look at this, was the problem in this incident the law? Was the legal framework the problem? The legal framework was not the problem. The inability and unwillingness of the police service to do their job was the problem. Passing new laws aren't going to make that inspector a more morally upstanding man. No new law is going to change the nature of that inspector. And that is one of my problems with many lawyers and many people who get into politics. They believe that it's all about passing the right laws. Like there is some combination of words you could write down on paper and go to parliament, and when it is passed, the country is going to function well. No, that's not how it works. If there were no laws written on the books, but that inspector was an upstanding man, very likely he would have found a way to have something done about this. And this lawyer in this article calls for implementation of sexual harassment criminal laws in Trinidad and Tobago for victims of street harassment and online tech sexual abuse. Now, I agree. This incident, this whole affair is horrible. It's disgusting. It's something that should not be going on. However, I think the pandemic that has passed us should be a lesson for us all in being sensible about finding solutions for drastic matters. Even if something is a drastic, serious matter, you have to be careful about the solutions you choose. KS Unique treats over on Instagram, good night to you. You have to be very careful about that. And he's asking for criminal laws for victims of street harassment. Are you sure that's the direction we want to go in? What is street harassment? What is harassment? How is harassment defined? And I dove down some rabbit holes looking into all of this, looking around the world, you know, where most of the information seems to come from, and looking at similar laws about harassment, etc., etc. Now, street harassment is a very difficult one. We'll get into that a little further. But in general, even general harassment in the workplace, as most laws are aimed at, general harassment is something that is ticklish to legislate. What is harassment? How do you even define harassment? And we're talking obviously about sexual harassment here. How do you even define something like that? And you do not want it to be that you create a whole new group of victims by making it very easy to victimize other people. Law from the legal dictionary. Sexual harassment. Unwelcomed sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature that tends to create a hostile or offensive work environment. Now, this here creates some problems because that very first line, unwelcome sexual advances, means that it is not really an objective standard. Objective meaning that everyone could identify it as an objective standard standing by itself. We can easily identify it. That's not how it goes. It's subjective because what is unwelcomed is subjective to who the person is. An unwelcome statement from one person may not be an unwelcome statement from another person. An unwelcome statement to one person may not be an unwelcome statement to another person. And if you're talking about making subjective human interactions into criminal law, you stand the chance of criminalizing regular human interactions. Let me see if we could get this broken down a bit further here. Unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of sexual nature constitute sexual harassment when 1. Submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of an individual's employment. Well, that one is pretty easy to see. If someone is saying, if you want this job, you need to do X, Y, Z, well, That one is pretty easy to tell. Submission to or rejection of such conduct by an individual is used as the basis for employment. Again, similarly, such conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment. Now, anytime you have something where you are determining a criminal law by what someone finds offensive, that gets scary to me. Some people may take saying good morning or evening as harassment. Now, it gets further than that. And you're right, some people may take it like that. For some of the men out there, you know, sometimes you could tell certain people, your indicator not working, and they treat it like if you were trying to kidnap them or something like that. So there is that reality too. Now, I'm looking for, right, types of sexual harassment. And now this is referring to the US legal standard here. This is the American legal standard here for obvious reasons. That's why it's the American one we're reading. Now, there is a Jamaican law that was passed, and we're going to dive into that also. The American standard has two different types of sexual harassment in the workplace. One is the quid pro quo, where basically someone is trying to exchange something for favors, and that's a much easier one to decipher. It's a much easier one to decipher. If you are offering someone a job for favors, you're well outside of the realm. You're well outside of the realm. Now, I think even in something like this, we have to be careful about removing someone's own agency. If someone decides to do such things on their own, like prostitution, who would you charge in something like that? If someone decides to use favors to gain resources some way, does someone have the ability, have the agency? Are they personally responsible for their own actions enough where they can make that choice on their own? Or is it that regardless of if it is deemed they made the choice on their own, they're still going to have to, the person who is seen as the aggressor will still be punished? Is that the case? Now, I pulled up an article here, false allegations of sexual harassment, misunderstandings and realities. And they went through a whole list of how harassment investigations generally go and the way it is done, and trying to show that by and large the investigations attempt to be fair, but there are some problems there. The power and Achilles heel of subjective impressions. Over the years, labor arbitrators have cautioned against using subjective impressions to decide the merit of workplace grievances of harassment. They have emphasized that objective standards, not solely the subjective impressions of the alleged victim or alleged harasser, must be applied in determining whether harassment or abuse has occurred. A famous photograph illustrates this. Conduct occurred, but does it constitute sexual harassment? So he goes on to describe a very famous photograph that is out there, where in the 60s, was it in the 60s? American Girl in Italy was a photograph taken in 1951 in Italy. The photo shows a woman walking along a sidewalk while men look at her. It's a photograph of a woman walking along a sidewalk and lots of men are looking at her. And in it, You will see some men staring. Some men have their mouths open. One man seems to even be touching his crotch area. And many people, when they look at the photograph has been for some time now, as it were, an image of what women go through in society and an image of the horrible male harassment nature. Now, here's the interesting thing with that photograph. In interviews this year, on the 60th anniversary exhibition of this iconic photograph, Nina Craig, who is the subject of the photograph, that's the actual girl in the photograph, the woman in the photograph, says some people want to use the photo as a symbol of harassment of women. But that's what we've been fighting all these years. It's not a symbol of harassment. It's a symbol of a woman having an absolutely wonderful time. Craig describes the street behavior of the men as making her feel appreciated. And what of the gesture by the man in the photo that seems to touch his crotch? And even that gesture, she says, she had no problem with. And therein is a lot of the problem. How can you have something if people cannot understand why women aren't receptive to hellos, you're all just ignorant that not all hellos are good manners? If people cannot understand why women aren't receptive to hellos, you're all just ignorant that not all hellos are good manners? I don't understand what you're trying to say there. I don't understand what you're trying to say there. And if you're talking about I don't care as in the subjective standards of harassment, then you're creating a whole other issue because you're going to end up victimizing men. There have been entire football teams. Well, it was a lacrosse team. There have been numerous men, replying to Trinidad sketch. Good. Some people may take, right. There have been numerous men falsely accused of such. And even if you say it is in the minority, if that is your brother, your son, your father, your male relative, you wouldn't care if it's in the minority. If there's a law crafted that allows someone to easily victimize your relative, you will hate it all the same. And we cannot be looking for solutions by creating more problems. That does not make sense. In a case like this, the subject of the photo says, I do not find this to be harassment. While probably a million different women looking at the same photo were like, look at these horrible harassing men, these misogynist pigs. But the subject did not find it was harassment. And according to the very definition of harassment, it's a subjective thing. So if the subject didn't find it was harassment, then by the definition, it is not harassment. And you're putting all the power of a criminal law into a subjective lens. That sounds extremely dangerous to me. I was looking at some legal recommendations for people who are accused of harassment. If you think you're innocent in such a case, apologize even if you are innocent was one of the recommendations. Your joke wasn't inappropriate. It's just that a coworker who is incredibly thin-skinned thought it was. If this is the case, apologize anyway. You weren't looking somewhere other than into a colleague's eyes. Apologize anyway. Why? Because sexual harassment law dictates it. Does that sound like a balanced thing? Like, let's be honest. Does that sound like a balanced thing? Because within what could be constituted as sexual harassment is looks. If someone stares at you, that could be considered sexual harassment. Now, Trinidad and Tobago does not have sexual harassment legislation. Not like that. We do not have that. Our harassment laws are generally done through the Equal Opportunities Commission. They are the ones who see about that. There are different legal avenues, and they can deal with your employers. If you deem something inappropriate, they can investigate and adjudicate such matters. And their definitions of harassment are pretty similar to the definitions you see all around the place. The definitions are very similar. But there's a difference. I wanted to go look at our Equal Opportunities Commission and see exactly what they have in this. And they have a section, what does not constitute sexual harassment. And I think this may be very important also, not just what constitutes it, but what does not constitute it. The decisive factor in classifying certain behavior as sexual harassment is the unwelcome nature of the behavior. Besides the unwanted criterion, offensive behavior can also lead to sexual harassment. So it's the unwelcome nature of it. Interaction which is based on mutual consent is not sexual harassment. So if you are okay with someone slapping your buttocks on work, that makes it automatically not sexual harassment. If you are not okay with it, then it is sexual harassment. Now, that's kind of obvious. Sexual harassment does not refer to occasional compliments. Now, who is to determine how often is occasional? Who is to determine what is a compliment? If I tell you, you have beautiful eyes, and you find me repulsive, I am the guy that you do not like. For whatever reason, you dislike me greatly. And I tell you, you have beautiful eyes. How would you necessarily take that? And then on the other side, if I tell you regularly you have beautiful eyes, but then when I tell you that, I look a different direction. I say you have beautiful eyes, but I'm looking at a different direction. You may get a different feeling from that. And how is such a thing proven? Now, inside this, sexual harassment does not refer to occasional compliments. And listen to the caveat that this is our Equal Opportunities Commission here. This isn't the United States. This isn't anywhere else. This is Trinidad and Tobago. Sexual harassment does not refer to occasional compliments that are socially and culturally acceptable and appropriate. We have a problem right there. Because what may be culturally acceptable to some may not be culturally acceptable to others. In Europe, over the past 3 or 4 years, they've been having some serious assault and harassment problems as refugees from different parts of the world flooded Europe within the last half of a decade or so. Flooded Europe. Now, some of these refugees come from some real patriarchal societies where women are not allowed in public. And some women walking through some of these refugee areas were harassed ruthlessly, horribly, and some even assaulted. And some of the courts determined that there were cultural differences there that meant they were not to prosecute some of these refugees like that. If your culture is okay with catcalling, as they call it, or suiting or wolf whistle, however you want to call it, if that is part of your culture, would that be a culturally acceptable compliment? Because I can see it possible that someone could argue once a day, oh fat, yes. That some people might consider that a compliment too. Some people might. But I could see someone trying to argue that suiting, family, that's a cultural thing. And then, would that be harassment? There was an organization and this was years ago. Now, these organizations are always out there trying, working to do what they can. They are regularly out there. And there was an organization that was attempting to get some progress done on this. And I, especially after reading the Equal Opportunities Commission's version of this, I found what was said by this organization to be very interesting. This was from a couple years ago, 2018.
Also discussed the relationship between sexual harassment and the culture, and whether the latter was used as a tool to excuse what CEDAW's founder Terry Ince described as bad behavior. She referenced more pointedly the issue of catcalling.
Why should a 12-year-old have to start navigating that avenue simply because men think it's their right to comment on her body? And why are we accepting that as our culture?
And anytime.
So she was addressing that very same problem. She was speaking about the fact that in our culture, some aspects of that are acceptable. And then in that case, by the EOC's definition, is that a culturally, in our society, a culturally acceptable compliment. And then who determines what our culture should or should not accept? Who determines if someone shooting you on the road is bad enough that we should remove it from our cultural acceptance? Who determines that? Who is the arbitrator of something as such? And you see, I don't suit people. Well, I'll suit my wife. But I personally, I don't understand the point in it. I watch men suit people for years and they ain't getting through. So I don't understand the point. I've yet to hear a man that said, you know, I suit that lady, call her family, and now we married. I've yet to hear that one. So I don't understand the point of it. I don't like it. I don't do it. I'm not trying to make an excuse for it. That's not my point. I'm saying that sometimes in just looking at these issues on face value, we could think that a lot of these issues are just so easy to solve. Throw a law in place, and that's that. Rhea says exactly, but adults should know better. Why must everything be read and spelled for people? Because that's what the law is for. The law is literally there to read and spell for everyone, because adults do not always know better. That's an assumption. That's an assumption. You're assuming that an adult is supposed to know this. If an adult says, I do not know this, then what do you say to that? Now, not all adults have the same moral standards. So some adult might say, for example, you're saying adults are supposed to know better. So everything shouldn't be read and spelled. No, some adults in their knowing better might say that if a woman is dressed scantily, she deserves that. She's looking for that. So she as a big woman should know better. Is that adult right? Is that adult right for saying that a scantily clad woman should have known better? Or is your version of who should know better the right thing? Whose version of know better is the right thing? When Tanti in her ankle-length house dress, that's how she goes on the town, watches around and sees homegirl in the Daisy Dukes with the chicks outside and etc. 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 Good night, SM Resources. By the way, anyone inside of the live, if you're looking for the plug for the chats, that's them right there, SM Resources. It's SM Resources over on TikTok, and Study Monkey and Associates over on Facebook. So that's them right there if you're looking for that link to the chats. Right. So who is to determine who knows better? I can assure you, if you were to take a survey of all the adults in Trinidad and Tobago, and what they know and what they think every adult is supposed to know better, you're going to get a lot of varied answers. So saying that the adults should know better actually does not make sense in this case. We go back to the point of who determines this. And in modern society, you're looking around in the Western world, and you're looking around at how women dress and and can generally walk the roads freely, etc., with no one assaulting them by and large. And you're saying that's how it should be. But if we're looking at the norms of humanity, if it's the norms of humanity we're looking at, if we're looking throughout the recorded history of mankind, most civilizations had much more constraints on their women. So if we are to go with the norms of humanity, are we to say that now we should go back to some of those norms? These adult women should know better than to walk the road. Which know better are we talking about? Which know better are we talking about? And just as we see here in this chat, some women would say, I don't mind the suiting as long as they don't touch me and they don't get to the anatomical descriptions. I don't care. I've heard many women say that. They don't care. It doesn't bother them like that. I have heard some women say, I'm not lying about this. I assure you I've sat in conversations with women and they've said sometime when they dress up a certain way and they walk through shagonas and they don't get any suits, they kind of wonder what's going on. I have heard girls and women say this, that, when they dress up a certain way, they kind of expect men to respond a certain kind of way. Good night, minister. And this shouldn't be something strange because I just read an article like that. This woman had a picture, a global popular picture. A man is grabbing his jewels looking at her. Another man is yelping at her. Another man is watching her like this, like that. And she is saying, in that situation, she considers that to be the picture, the image that represents a woman being appreciated and enjoying herself. Massimo Original, I notice you are an informed person. He says over on Instagram there, Sweden was actually known for women walking the beaches naked. However, this has stopped really quickly due to cultural differences. And yes, that is true. Some cultures are different from that. So, who knows better here? Who knows better here? This is the problem with subjective laws. And then, bear in mind, the guy who wrote the article, his words was he wanted criminal laws for these things. Do you want it to be that the same act that some women would softly encourage from men, they really want to feel that appreciation. They want the man to look around and I see you. They want that. Some women do. I'm not saying all do, and let's not get into the nitty-gritty of that, but some women do. And should it be that the act that some women want would get a man jailed in another situation? Would that be something that we want in our society? Would that be how we want our society to run? And here's the thing. What you're doing there, I think, if you push too far in certain directions like that, you make human interactions very complicated. And then they will tell all of you to go find a partner on Tinder. So, no, you cannot go walk up to somebody and tell them, ma'am, I was looking at you and I find you look fine and I'd like to get your number. You're 5'4". This is harassment. While another man walk up and, you sweet girl, give me a number now. And she has to look up at him so because he's 6'4". And she like, yeah. That's not how laws are supposed to be made. That's how you make new victims. That's how you make new victim classes from subjective interpretation of criminal laws. Is that really what we would want in our country? Now, here's the thing. As I've said so many times in so many of my lives, some of these issues, the problems with it, isn't from a legal standpoint. Some of these issues you cannot solve with laws written in books. You solve it culturally. Just as the EOC said, a compliment that is recognized by our culture. So if you find our culture should be men should not speak to women until the woman comes up and says, I'm attracted to you first, then okay, by all means, as you go along, try to influence culture in that direction. See how that works. A lot of these things are causing some strange occurrences. For quite some time, I can't remember the exact number, I think it could have been upwards of 70% of people found their spouses at work. And if you ask some women, because men are the pursuers, generally speaking, if you ask some women, many of them may tell you the first couple of times he spoke to her, he was a little sick. No. It happens. But now, if on the already, so you have men already facing the risk of rejection, and on top of that, you have the risk of prison. And then these very same women will see that men don't approach them anymore. Where have all the chivalrous men gone? Men only want women to make the first move now. Well, of course they do, because they don't want to go to jail. And again, I think it makes sense repeating that I am not excusing harassment and abuse. By no means. And I think culturally, it should be relatively easy to distinguish this. And the problems we are having is that cultures are becoming more and more corrupted. So some of these things become a lot harder to do. What say you? What say you in the chat? As per usual, if you're inside of the live chat, hit that like button. Share the live if you're so interested in doing. And if you're not following, I noticed that over on TikTok, quite a few people that view aren't following. So you could hit the follow button also. But what do you think? What kind of society would you want? Could one be sickening and respectful? Yes, you can be sickening and respectful. We don't mind chivalrous approaches. It's the heckling and the inappropriate comments. True. Now, Jade TT21, thanks for replying. Thanks for replying. Here's part of the problem with that. There have been studies done that show what some women determine as inappropriate depends on who it is coming from. It's just a fact. It is just a fact. The same approach that might be considered respectful from one, well, not respectful, but wanted from one person, determined by who the person is, it might be considered inappropriate. And Shai Panda said this the other day also, men don't pick up social cues. You must be able to recognize when a woman just ain't feeling you. I agree. I agree fully. Men should try to learn social cues better. I agree. Full 100. But there are socially awkward men too. Listen, I'm not talking about the obvious harassment and abuse here. But there are socially awkward men too. And by the definition of the harassment law, this is my problem that I'm telling you. By the definition of the harassment law, if a man is socially awkward, comes up to you and makes you feel uncomfortable because of his interaction, it by definition will be legally considered sexual harassment. You were made to feel uncomfortable. You were offended by his approach. by him even having the audacity to walk up to you, you were offended by it. And you could legitimately call that harassment by the legal definition. Teriyaki says, on the flip side, social cues not as obvious recently as some people start making more social cues. Agreed. We're in a world that is in so much flux. Our world is changing more than it has ever changed before. More than it has ever changed before. Things are changing very regularly. Listen, the dress code. I don't know how many of you are Bible readers in here. But in Proverbs in the Bible, they have things speaking about the raiment, the attire, the clothing of a harlot. That's some old English from whenever King James was there and wrote it over in the English language. But all that meant was clothes that hoes wore. The Bible has that. That good book has the clothes that hoes wore. Enjoying your life, by the way. You have a brilliant mind and people should take in your content more. I fully agree with that, Teriyaki. Thank you very much. But the Bible has that. The Bible speaks about the clothes that hoes wore. The Bible. And now, I would imagine that some of the clothing that is culturally acceptable now might directly be some of what that book may have considered the clothing of hoes. I always remember a joke that Dave Chappelle said a while ago. One of his earlier, was it Dave? Yes, it was Dave. One of his earlier stand-ups. And he was talking about, he walked up to, he saw a lady standing on a street and she was dressed, sexily, extra sexily. And he walked up to her and offered her some money for services. It's a joke. It's a joke he was telling. And she was offended. Very offended. Just because I'm dressed like this does not mean I'm a hoe. And he was like, fine enough. But then he went on to say that that's true. Just because you're dressed like that doesn't mean you're that. But then he says, it's similar. Like if him, Dave Chappelle, the comedian, puts on a police uniform and walks the road, and someone is the victim of a crime and run up to him, please officer, help. And he turns around and tells them, just because I'm dressed like this does not mean I'm a police. And his point was that certain things may be the attire of a certain profession. And then is the whole cultural dilemma. Amir Alpha says, big up, bro, you're a huge inspiration to me. Keep doing what you're doing and keep inspiring this generation of brilliant minds. Thank you, sir. Lala recalled that, but he said you're wearing a hoe's clothes. Yes, that's what he said. So we are in a different cultural time. You can't walk up to a woman standing on a corner dressed scantily and offer her money and say that she's a prostitute. Now, that may have been culturally acceptable at another time. That may have been culturally acceptable at another time. But it is no longer culturally acceptable. Culture changes. That's why these subjective things create problems. That's why, generally, many societies try to remain away from prosecuting things that are words. Prosecuting words tends to get very sticky very quickly. Now, it's much easier to prosecute actions. If a man touches you without your consent, by all means. By all means. Like, I know there are some guys who do the whole suiting business, and if you don't answer, they reach out to grab your hand and all of that nonsense. I find you should be suing him for assault. You should be looking to get him locked up. I think we're always studying what the other person does and not studying our own. You see, here's the problem with all of this, Ria. Here's the problem that occurs with a lot of this. Society is not equal. Men and women are not equal. We are not the same. I don't care what Judith Butler told you. I don't care what Naomi Wolf told you. I don't care what all the bra-burning feminists told you. Men and women are not the same. We do not function the same. We do not interact the same, generally. Also, women do not want men to act the same as women. Fact. Women want men to approach them. You could go through any study anywhere in the world, ask the women if they want men to approach them or them to approach the men, and you will get your answer pretty quickly. Good night, I love black women. You'll get your answer pretty quickly. Women, by and large, want men to approach them. But if you want men to approach you, and at the same time, you want to have legal power to throw them in jail if they don't approach you perfectly how you want, then how do you expect men to realistically approach you? I think if you as a woman want words to be prosecuted to that extent so easily, then you should be pushing for societal change. You are supposed to be the woman on the forefront of society, pushing for women to go and start to walk up to men. You go and make the first move. You go and make the first move. If you find that men shouldn't talk to you anytime you don't want them to, then go on the forefronts of society and make calls for women to approach men. All the gal out there, go and approach the men first. That's the cultural change you're supposed to be pushing for. Because you're saying that you don't want men to approach you. And here's the strange thing with all of this. Men approaching women already stand a higher chance of rejection than women approaching men. Am I right or wrong? If a man approaches a woman and a woman approaches a man, who stands a higher chance of being rejected? The man or the woman? The man. It's always been like that. Women are more selective. Women are more selective. So the man already stands a higher chance of being rejected. And on top of that, you don't only want to be able to reject him. You don't only want to be able to talk about him in the group chat. You don't only want to be able to post a status about him. You want to be able to throw him in jail too. Like, don't you find that? Don't you find that to be unfair? Now, Ria says men are easy. That's not true, Ria. You see, just for a side note here, as we're going down that line, on a side note there, what women need to understand, and this is very well documented. Men have two mating strategies. They have a short term and they have a long term. The short term mating strategy of men is anybody. The short term mating strategy of men is basically anybody. While the long-term mating strategy of men is pretty exclusive. Men don't choose any and everybody for their long-term mates. So, yes, men are easy to get in bed with, but they aren't easy to get to marry you. That's why there are so many women right now complaining about men not wanting to marry them. So, yeah, men are easy, but they're easy because that's what they want. There's something called the sociosexuality. You could Google that if you think I'm talking nonsense. Google it and see the studies on it. Sociosexuality. It determines how many partners one is interested in having, how many sexual partners one is interested in having. I'm seeing you, Jada. I'll answer that just now. And I agree. People are interested in having. And the sociosexuality of men is much higher than the sociosexuality of women. And it annoys me to no end that so many women buy the lie of the sexual revolution, buy the lie of the bra burners, and believe that men and women desire sexuality in the same way. It's a lie. Like, why? Wow. Hard luck there, Instagram. Ha. Like, why would you allow someone to lie to you like that? It's not true. We do not desire the same type of sexual attraction the same way. Men have a much higher sociosexuality. Men are interested in having more partners. They are. It's just reality. If you ask generally, most women, if their dream is to have, wow, I have to get something to wet this. Hold on for a moment there, TikTok. Sorry, not TikTok. Instagram. My phone stand is doing its own thing for the moment. But yes, men and women have a different level of sociosexuality. So we don't desire the same things. Do not let the sexual revolution lie to you and make you lie to yourself. If you don't desire it, don't make them try to convince you that you do. We do not. So if you're saying men are easy because you're getting to sleep with them, then you're actually falling into what men desire more. Because here's one way it is proven. They have done some studies. As you know, I like reading studies. That's what I do all night sometimes. They have done some studies where they went through college campuses and they looked in college campuses where there were discrepancies. Between males and females. When the female was the limiting factor, meaning that there are fewer women than men, meaning that the men have to compete for the women, the campus had monogamous lifestyles. You're understanding what that means? And in campuses, which are most campuses, where there were more women than men, meaning the men were in limited supply, they had much more hookup culture, as in sleeping around. What that means, what that shows, is that when men are the limiting factor, they get the sexual strategy that they prefer, which is sleeping around. And when women are the limiting factor, they get the sexual strategy that they generally prefer, which is by and large monogamy. Sometimes it may be serial monogamy, meaning that one at a time and then go to the next one and then go to the next one. But by and large, most women, it's monogamy they're aiming for in that sense. So saying men are easy, to me, that men are easy trope is actually a trick against women, because that plays into the man's hand. The men that are easy because they want to be easy. That's their desire. Just by the way. All right. Jada was saying some interesting stuff up there. She said we also need to push for a cultural change in the way men approach women. I don't think it's working. They act desperate. I do agree. I've been speaking to youth men out there. I've been trying to do my part. I've been trying to teach some of these youth men. Now, the thing is, I think social media crippled a lot of it. Because I've seen some of these youth men, and over the screen, it's so impersonal, they could say anything. These fellas say some outrageous things in the DMs. They come in brave. Like star boys out there, you're like, wow. You know this girl so good? That's what you're saying? And then you put them in real life circumstances and they can't say a word, or they come out and babble a lot of nonsense. So I agree. The men leave much to be desired. So by women saying that men are easy, it's just a statement intended to guard yourself. I think some of that may be due to the feminization of women in the first place. Some of these young men are just too feminine. They're too worried about hurt emotions. I'm not saying men shouldn't be emotional. That's not the road I'm going down. But I am a believer in that men are meant to be a bit more stoic. I don't know how many of you have ever heard the idea that hard times, it's a cycle. Hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. good times make weak men, and weak men make hard times. And that seems to be the cycle that civilization has gone in continually since humanity has been civilizationing. So I am more down the side of stoicism when it comes to men. Like, man up. I don't find that to be a sexist thing. I find you should man up. And I always find it so strange. Now, I know this is straying a lot from the topic, but say what? I always find it so strange when people speak about masculinity as being the negative and about the negative things that men do in these days because of the negative aspects of masculinity. When the reality is much of the men in these days are lacking in masculine attention, lacking in masculine molding. A lot of these men do not have men in their lives. A lot of these boys that are born into single mother homes, they go to a preschool where like 99% of the teachers are women. They go to primary school where probably 85% of the teachers are women. Then they go to secondary school. Trinidad still has quite a few males in secondary school, but it's moving more and more in the female direction in terms of teachers. They go through a system where it's mostly women. And if you listen to some people that are primatologists, they study primates, they study other animals, they study the development of humans also, and how humans develop going up. You'd hear them say that very often the very nature of a school environment is more conducive to what generally girls want. Boys generally have more energy. Little boys generally do. Little boys generally always wild play, while wild play is forbidden in school. And role play, which little girls do much more, is encouraged in school. So they enter a school system that is already leaning against them. I can attest I've been around all my life and get along better with women. No proper masculine figure to show them what true masculinity is. I agree, roly-poly the only, but women don't handle rejection well. Have you ever told a woman, no thanks, not interested, Gil? We don't even want to talk about that right now. From a Darwinian standpoint, Massimo says men are able to outlast women with regards to reproductive abilities. That's true. Thus, men have less of an... That's true. That's the reason behind the sociosexuality, as I always say, there's a biological reason for that. Do you think the elimination of masculinity makes a population easier to control? Yes and no. Yes, possibly in the initial sense, and no in the long-term sense, because there are various reasons for that. One, a statement I like is the barbarians are at the gate. Rome, the Roman Empire, fell into decadence near the end of their civilization. They had a lot of, and I know this could sound controversial. I am not even saying whether this is good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just making a historical anthropological observation. At the end of nearly every civilization, they become obsessed with sexuality and the variance in sexuality. They become obsessed with gender expressions, and they become obsessed with food. Strange thing. Same thing happened to the Romans, same thing happened to the Grecians, and it seems like it's happening to the West, just by the way. But the Romans became so decadent. But here's the problem. You are not the only person on earth. There are always other people out there looking at what you have. So the Romans were enjoying themselves in Rome, but the barbarians didn't care about your decadence. There would always be barbarians willing to break down the gate to come in. Europe is falling for some of that right now, where they have brought about a pretty soft society because of the strength they have had for some time, a really soft society. Empress Rooney, when a man is ready to marry, yes, at that stage we are very selective and a barrage of other guilt trips. The society eventually fell to the barbarians at the gate. That's one thing that would happen. And then also, I personally believe that our societies function best when there are gender roles. I always push the gender roles. I don't care. I push gender roles. I look around and I see that I naturally grow taller, stronger than my woman compatriot. And that seems to tell me, obviously, if I'm trying to be sensible here, you do gender roles based on that. You use what you are best at. And I think societies are optimized when each gender role is optimized. What the version of that might be could be debatable, but I certainly don't think that the gender role of a man, is optimized by acting more like a woman. It just does not make sense. A one on YouTube called The Authentic Observer did a video called The Desecration of Femininity. It's an hour long or so, but she pointed out this issue about femininity being viewed as bad when compared to masculinity or masculine traits. I spoke about that just last week. The way how so much times in society it could seem like people look down on things that are feminine and glorify things that are masculine. It's ridiculous. But yes, roly poly, you are very right. Women don't take rejection very well. They are horrible at it. And it's so strange because they aren't rejected nearly as much as men. Listen, some fellas out here really know rejection, you know. They really know rejection. That's why I try, like, I remember the podcast I was on last week. I was saying, like, if you're a woman and you meet a man, 35 years, he now hit his glow up. As in, he was rejected from secondary school all the way up to 35. He now hit his glow up. And he now start to watch some Fresh and Fit. You should probably leave that man alone. I'm just saying. Rejection does something to you. Those men sometimes, they have a vengeance they are trying to execute on the world. Just by the way. Or teeth, yeah. I totally agree with you concerning gender roles. You won't go by a doctor to fix your car, and you won't go by a mechanic to get a surgery. Precisely. Precisely. All right, folks. Wow, that's an hour and a half. We've been going. It was nice, but I think we could call it a night there. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained. And as lately, the live was sponsored. The charts are sponsored by Study Monkey. STUD with 2 E's. Study with 2 E's. Study Monkey and Associates over on Facebook. Feel free to head over there and, buy some of their charts. Buy out all of their charts. By all means. They're a sponsor here. Buy out all. Also, the live was brought to you by Mindful Education. I am reopening some more tutorship slots and some pod classes starting in the new year. Feel free to hit it up and register. Hit me up in my inbox. The page should be dropping sometime tomorrow if you would be so interested. Yes, Study Monkey and Associates, SM Resources right there. That is them. They are responsible for the charts if you are interested in such. Also, we would be having a meetup at the end of this month. Well, the last weekend in this month. The 28th of August. That's a Sunday. The location is yet to be determined. The location is yet to be determined. Do you usually do lives at a specific time? Yes. My lives generally start at 9 p.m. or 9:30 p.m. It's either 9:15 or 9:30. It's according to how quick I get home and how quick I prepare. But 9:15 or 9:30 every weeknight, by and large. That's when the mindful lives are. Make the Discord for... Correct. That's a very good idea, Empress Rooney. I will be making that Discord so we could get into planning of the mindful meetup. Listen. If I do not show for the live, of late, I always drop a status. And usually if I do not show up for the live, it might be because I'm a guest on another podcast. It's because I'm a guest on another podcast or something. And I'll post where that is. Roni, I changed from always. Okay. Like, all right. The condemnation, I'm feeling judged. I am feeling judged. Sheesh. Anyway, I will be creating that Discord so that we can plan the mindful meetup on the 28th of this month. And I will see you then. Ha! Why would I take in a show I will hate, Rooney? Why will I do that? Why will I do that to myself? I do not watch much TV these days because I find a lot of the TV shows these days try so hard to put their view of what may be morality over on you, and it takes away from the entertainment. It nearly seems, and this isn't to overly criticize my Christian TV shows. I like some of those Christian TV shows, but I remember some of the real Christian TV shows in the start in the 80s and the 90s, and they were so obviously about putting the doctrine forward that the entertainment side was a little lacking sometimes, and the storyline could seem a little janky. And a lot of these modern shows are like that now. Like, why is that man gay? It still doesn't even make sense. Gay people are less than what, 5% of the population? I can't remember. It's really 2%, 2 point something percent of the population. If you were to follow by Netflix, it's like 50, at least 50% of the population. That's ridiculous. And it's not like I have something against them, but oh gosh, it seems very obvious trying to push an agenda, and I don't like that. I don't want to watch entertainment and feel like you're trying to influence my mind and influence my ideology. Like, no, give me an ease up. So I honestly don't even watch much TV. I am on the internet a lot. I take in quite a few podcasts, quite a few online videos, etc., etc., etc. I'm cool there. I'm cool there. And where you could more select your movies. Anyway, I hope you're educated, informed, and entertained. I'm supposed to be gone already. And hold it down. I will see you guys tomorrow for the next Mindful Live. Peace. It was nice. I really do enjoy this. Just so you know, I do enjoy this. If any one of you have a small business like Study Monkey and you're interested in figuring out a way to be a sponsor, it doesn't necessarily have to be anything exorbitant. Hit me up and let's see